There are moments in history that nobody photographs. Not because there are no cameras. There are always cameras. But because the people inside the moment have agreed, without saying so out loud, that what is happening cannot be captured by a lens, that it belongs to the room and the room alone and whatever comes after. March 7th, 2025 was one of those moments. 10 FBI agents, 1 billionaire, a plain manila envelope sealed with dark red wax, the kind of seal that belongs to another century, the kind that says, if this is open when you receive it, someone has already betrayed you. Nobody leaked it. Nobody posted it. Nobody breathed a word of it for 72 hours, which, in Washington, D.C., is the rough equivalent of a miracle. But it happened. And what was inside that envelope would bring down a United States senator. I'd expose a dead journalist's final act of courage and lead 2 FBI agents to a name so unexpected that one of them, a quiet data analyst from Wichita who had never once fired his weapon in the line of duty, sat in a fluorescent-lit conference room and read it twice before he could make himself believe it was real. This is how it began. The 10 black SUVs did not come with sirens. That was the first thing Marcus Tilley noticed. He was the morning security guard at SpaceX Starbase in Boca Chica, Texas, a 24-year-old kid from Brownsville who had held this job for 7 months and had never once had a morning that felt like anything other than ordinary. He was drinking his second coffee of the day, watching the sun come up flat and orange over the Gulf of Mexico, when he saw the convoy moving down State Highway 4 toward the facility gate. 10 vehicles, black, government plates, moving in a single, perfectly spaced line, like a hand of cards laid down on a table, one after another, slow and deliberate. No sirens, no lights, just the sound of gravel crunching under heavy tires, and then, one by one, 10 engines going quiet. Marcus set down his coffee. He reached for his radio. A woman was already out of the lead vehicle before he could key the mic. Tall, dark jacket, short hair going silver at the temples. She walked to his window with the unhurried confidence of someone who has never once in her adult life needed to hurry to be taken seriously. She held up a badge, gold and blue, the kind Marcus had only ever seen on television. Special Agent Diana Ferrante, she said. FBI Washington Field Office. We have a scheduled appointment. Marcus looked at the badge, and he looked at the 9 other agents standing in a loose line behind the vehicles, hands visible, faces unreadable. He looked back at Ferrante. I don't have anything in the log, he said. No, she said. You wouldn't. He called it in. His supervisor called someone above him. That person called someone above them. It took 4 minutes and 14 seconds. Marcus watched the clock on his console before his radio crackled, and a voice he had never heard before said simply, "Let them through." He lifted the gate. Inside the lead SUV, for the 4 minutes they waited, Diana Ferrante did not speak. She sat with her hands flat on her thighs and looked straight ahead through the windshield at the Starship launch tower rising against the morning sky. She had seen it in photographs. In photographs, it looked impressive. In person, yet in the pale early light, it looked like something from a dream. Or a warning. Nearly 400 feet of steel scaffolding and ambition, the tallest privately built rocket structure on Earth, built by a man who had spent 20 years telling the world he was going to make the human species multiplanetary, and who had somehow, incomprehensibly, found the time to also become the center of the most sensitive federal investigation Diana Ferrante had handled in 22 years of service. She thought about what Director Reyes had said to her at 11 p.m. the previous night, on a call so secure it required 3 separate authentications to join. Whatever he gives you, you do not open it, you do not read it, you photograph it, bag it, and you call me the moment it is in your hands. Not your supervisor. Me. I and Diana do not tell your team what's inside, because I don't know what's inside, and neither does anyone else in this building. That's the point. 22 years. She had heard a lot of strange things in 22 years. She had never heard a sitting FBI director say, "I don't know," like it was a reason to be more careful, not less. Priya Nair met them in the lobby. She was wearing dark slacks and a pale blue blouse with one button done wrong, second from the top, off by one hole. And Ferrante noticed it immediately and said nothing. Priya's eyes were dry, but the skin beneath them was purple and heavy. The face of someone who had been awake for most of the last 72 hours. Not because of work, but because of fear. She did not say good morning. She looked directly at Ferrante and said, "He's been waiting for you." They walked a long white hallway in silence, past a wall of mission patches in glass frames, Falcon 9, Dragon, Crew 3, Starship SN-15. Past a window overlooking the pad, past a young engineer who pressed himself against the wall when he saw them coming, 10 federal agents walking in a line, and stared with wide eyes at their backs as they passed. The conference room was plain. One table, 12 chairs, one window. Elon Musk was already standing. He was wearing a black t-shirt. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. The tired of someone who has been holding something very heavy and has finally decided, after a long time, that he cannot hold it alone anymore. He did not extend his hand. He reached behind him, into the inside pocket of a jacket hung over the chair, and removed an envelope. Plain manila. No label. No markings. Just a dark red wax seal pressed over the flap. The old kind. The kind that tells you, if this is already open, someone has already broken something. He held it out. Ferrante took it. The room was completely silent. Outside, a gust of South Texas wind moved across the launch pad, and the tower groaned, very softly, the way large structures do when something invisible pushes against them. Then Musk spoke. 4 words, quietly, the way people speak in churches and hospitals, places where the truth costs something. "She told me to." Ferrante went still. She looked at him. She looked at the envelope in her hand. She looked back at him. Nobody in the room said anything. None of the 9 agents behind her knew who she was. And neither did Ferrante. Musk offered nothing more. No name, no explanation, no expression she could read. He pulled out his chair and sat down. "I'd like a lawyer present," he said, "before I say anything else." The envelope sat on the table between them. Nobody opened it. Not that night. Not on the government jet back to Washington. Not in the black SUV that carried it from Joint Base Andrews to the Washington field office at 601 4th Street Northwest, where it was logged into evidence at 2:47 p.m., under a case number that did not yet have a name. The envelope sat in a locked drawer in a windowless room on the 4th floor, sealed and silent, while 1,800 miles away in Wichita, Kansas, a postal worker named Del Voss was sorting mail on his morning route, and his son Colton was sitting alone in the Washington field office at 11:47 p.m., eating a granola bar from the vending machine on the 2nd floor and staring at a spreadsheet that was about to change everything. Colton Voss was the kind of person nobody wrote home about. He was 31 years old, medium height, brown hair that was always about 3 weeks past needing a cut. He had a face that people looked at and immediately felt comfortable with. Not because it was remarkable, but because it was the opposite of remarkable. Forgettable in the best possible way. He had learned, over time, to use that. People said things around Colton Voss they would never say around someone who looked important. They left documents open on their screens. They spoke freely on the phone. He was, in the quiet language of federal data analysis, perfectly placed. His cubicle had 2 monitors, a mechanical keyboard, and a coffee mug that said, Wichita. Not as flat as you think. No photos. No plants. The one personal item on his desk was a small index card taped to the bottom corner of his left monitor. Written on it in his own handwriting, in blue ink. The number doesn't lie. You just have to be willing to hear it. His father had said that once about sorting mail. Del Voss believed that every envelope, every package, every piece of paper that moved through his hands had a correct destination. And that getting it there was not a small thing, no matter how small it looked. Colton had carried that into a different kind of work, with a different kind of envelope. But the belief was the same, that tonight he was doing what his supervisor Gerald Hoof had called a routine contract audit, cross-referencing Department of Defense satellite launch records against private vendor invoices going back to 2021. It was exactly as tedious as it sounded. The kind of task that got assigned to someone capable enough to do it correctly, and invisible enough that nobody would check too carefully what they found. Ho had given it to him on a Tuesday morning without looking up from his own screen. Discretionary Fund Audit, 2021 through 2024. Launch contracts, standard reconciliation. Flag anything over threshold. Colton had said okay. He had been saying okay to Hoof for 3 years. At 11:47 p.m., he almost said okay to the thing he was looking at and moved on. Almost. Because it was small. Because he was tired. Because the granola bar was stale and the office was empty and the cleaning crew had already come and gone, and the only sound in the building was the low hum of the HVAC system breathing through the ceiling. But something made him stop. Invoice number 2022-DOD-LC-8841. Filed under a 2022 Department of Defense record for a SpaceX Falcon 9 launch. A standard satellite deployment contract, fully certified, lowest bidder, all the correct boxes checked. Paid out from Defense Discretionary Fund subaccount 14C. He had seen that invoice number before, somewhere in this same dataset. He scrolled back. His eyes moved down columns of numbers the way his father's hands moved through envelopes. Quickly, instinctively, trusting the muscle to find the wrong thing before the brain could name it. There. Invoice number 2022-DOD-LC-8841. Again. Unfiled under a 2023 record. Different company. A firm called Axiom Orbital Solutions, based in Huntsville, Alabama. Different launch, different date, different mission, same invoice number, same fund. Colton sat back. Invoice numbers are unique. That is their entire purpose. One number, one transaction, one destination. Finding the same number twice in a government payment system is like finding the same social security number on 2 different people. It does not happen by accident. He pulled the thread. By 1:30 a.m., he had found 9 more. By 2:15 a.m., 23. By 3:04 a.m., when the granola bar wrapper was long in the trash and his 3rd coffee had gone cold, he had found 31 duplicate invoice numbers, all of them drawing from the same subaccount. All of them involving contracts that the record showed should have gone to SpaceX, lowest certified bidder, every time, being quietly, cleanly redirected to Axiom Orbital Solutions. He dug into Axiom's SEC filings, founded 2019, privately held. Executive team thin on public profile. One name stood out as a board member, a man listed under a corporate holding company called Vantage Launch Partners, LLC. It took Colton 11 minutes to trace Vantage back through 2 layers of corporate registration to its sole owner, a man named Gerard Plinth. He typed the name into the Bureau's internal records system. Gerard Plinth, age 54, Huntsville, Alabama. No criminal record. One connection of note. Brother-in-law of Senator Marshall Tice, Republican, Texas. Colton stared at the screen for a long time. The HVAC hummed. The building was perfectly empty. The city outside was dark in the way that only government cities get dark. All the power still on, all the lights still burning, but every human being behind them gone home. He thought about Gerald Hoof, about what Hoof would do with this if Colton sent it through the standard channel, about the fact that Hoof had told him once on the elevator, going down, "Some audits finish themselves, Colton. A good analyst knows when a number is just a number." He had not understood that sentence then. He understood it now. He did not send it to Hoof. He opened an encrypted internal message, typed 4 lines, and sent it to the one person in the Bureau he trusted without question. Agent Darius Okafor, Houston Field Office, who had been Colton's closest friend since they trained together in Quantico 6 years ago, and who answered his phone in 4 rings even at 3:19 in the morning. "How bad?" Okafor said. No hello, no preamble. The voice of a man who had learned a long time ago that late-night calls were never about nothing. Colton said, 31 of them, and I think there are more." The line was quiet for a moment. "Don't send it through Hoof," Okafor said. His voice had changed, lower, careful, each word placed like a foot on uncertain ground. "Don't send it through anyone. Close the files, go home, sleep, and come back in the morning like tonight never happened. Can you do that?" "Yes," Colton said. "But why?" Okafor exhaled slowly. "Because 2 weeks ago," he said, "I got a message from a journalist named Ruth Caldera at ProPublica in Austin. See, she was working the same thread you just found. And Colton—" He stopped. "What?" Colton said. "I haven't heard from her in 6 days." The HVAC hummed. The numbers glowed on the screen. Outside, Washington, D.C. held its breath the way it always did in the dark hours. Enormous and complicated, and full of things nobody was supposed to know. Colton looked at the index card on his monitor. The number doesn't lie. You just have to be willing to hear it. He closed the files. He put on his jacket. He turned off the light. He did not sleep. He lay on his back in his apartment on Shepherd Street in Columbia Heights, 7 miles from the office, staring at the ceiling with his coat still on, listening to the city outside his window. A truck, a siren 3 blocks over, a dog barking twice, and then going quiet. His phone was face down on his chest, and every few minutes he felt the urge to pick it up and search Ruth Caldera's name, and every few minutes he talked himself out of it. "Wait," Okafor had said. "Come back in the morning like tonight never happened." He waited. At 5:58 a.m., his phone buzzed. Not Okafor. A news alert. Local Austin outlet. 12 words on his lock screen that hit him like a fist through the glass. Body recovered near Congress Avenue Bridge. Austin police investigating. He sat up. He searched her name. Ruth Caldera had been a journalist for 19 years, and she had spent all 19 of them doing the same thing in different rooms, sitting across from people who did not want to be found out and asking them, very politely, to explain themselves. She started at the Austin American-Statesman covering City Hall, school board elections, on a water district scandal in 2009 that resulted in 2 resignations and a redrawn contract worth $4 million to the taxpayers of Travis County. Small stories, locally enormous. The kind that mattered deeply to the people living inside them and nobody outside them. And Ruth had always believed that was exactly the right size for truth to be. The size of the lives it touched. She moved to ProPublica in 2014, and the room got bigger. The people across the table got more powerful. The things they did not want, found out, got more expensive. She won a National Press Foundation Award in 2021 for a story about systematic overcharges in military family housing contracts, a piece that took 14 months, 400 documents, and one source who met her in a Cracker Barrel parking lot in Fayetteville, North Carolina. It because he was too frightened to be seen anywhere near a federal building. She had a daughter named Sophia, 9 years old, brown eyes and gap-toothed and obsessed with a video game Colton would later look up, just to feel connected to something about her. Ruth coached Sophia's Saturday morning soccer team at Zilker Park, in the long, flat green shadow of downtown Austin. Every weekend she was not traveling. Her co-coach, a father named Brendan Rourke, would tell Detective Esperanza Lund later that Ruth had seemed tired in the last few weeks, but never frightened, that she had laughed at practice 2 Saturdays before she died, that Sophia had scored a goal, and Ruth had run onto the field in her coat and hugged her daughter so hard the girl squealed and said, "Mom, everyone is watching." She was found at the water's edge below Congress Avenue Bridge at 6:02 a.m. on March 4, 2025. She had been in the Colorado River. The bridge is 65 feet above the water. People have fallen before. Accidents happen on bridges in the dark. Detective Esperanza Lund of the Austin Police Department arrived at the scene at 6:31 a.m. She had been a detective for 11 years, and she had worked 8 deaths at or near that bridge, and she knew the way those cases looked and felt and smelled. And standing on the riverbank in the thin March morning looking at Ruth Caldera, something about this one did not sit right inside her. She could not have said exactly what. Experience does not always come with language. Sometimes it is just a weight in the chest that will not move. She walked the bridge herself. She noted the railing. She noted the angle of the nearest streetlight, enough to see by, not enough to be certain of anything. A jogger, a man named Perry Galt, who ran the bridge every morning at 4:30 a.m., told her he had seen a figure standing at the east railing around 4:45. He could not describe it. Dark clothes. Still. Just standing. He had assumed it was someone looking at the water, the way people sometimes do at that hour. Privately, with something on their mind. He had not stopped. He said he wished he had stopped. In Ruth's apartment on East 6th Street, investigators found her laptop open on the kitchen table, screen still glowing, battery still at 34%. The document open on the screen had a title bar that read, SpaceX, Axiom, Tice, Final. Detective Lund photographed it. She did not fully understand what she was looking at. She logged it. I sent it to the Texas Rangers as standard procedure, and wrote 3 words in her notebook that she would return to many times over the following weeks. This wasn't falling. At ProPublica's office in New York, editor Simon Weathers arrived at his desk at 8:45 a.m. and found a voicemail notification, automated, triggered by a missed check-in Ruth had set up without telling him. He played it with his door closed and his hand over his mouth. Her voice was calm, clear, like she was reading from notes she had prepared carefully and rehearsed just enough. If you're hearing this, I missed my check-in. The documents are not in my apartment. They are not on my laptop. I gave them to someone I trust who will know when to use them. The name you want is Axiom Orbital Solutions. The senator is Marshall Tice. The fund is Line 7, defense discretionary. Subaccount 14C, and please, a pause. 2 seconds, the length of a breath being gathered. Tell Sophia her mom loves her more than everything. Simon Weathers called the FBI at 9:03 a.m. He was routed to a general intake line. He left a message with his name and number and the word urgent 3 times. The message sat in a queue for 4 days. In a school on Cesar Chavez Street in Austin, a 9-year-old girl with brown eyes sat in the second row of her classroom and raised her hand to answer a question, and the teacher called on her, and she answered and was right. And she smiled the way children smile when they do not yet know that the world has already changed. She smiled the way children smile when they do not yet know that the world has already changed. Priya Nair had smiled like that once, so she remembered it clearly. Not the specific moment, but the specific feeling. The feeling of not knowing yet. Of walking through a room that contained something dangerous without being able to see it. The way you might walk through a field at night, not knowing there is a drop 10 feet ahead of you. Feeling only grass under your feet, and wind on your face, and the clean, uncomplicated pleasure of moving forward. She had not felt that way in 3 months. She had grown up in Chennai, in a narrow house on a street so loud with traffic and vendors and temple bells that she had learned early to build a kind of internal quiet, a room inside herself where the noise could not reach. Her mother was a school teacher. Her father ran a small printing business, not the kind that made wedding invitations and business cards and the occasional flyer for a local politician who needed his face on something before an election. He had taught her, without meaning to, that documents matter, that the words people choose to put on paper and the words they choose not to put on paper tell you almost everything about who they actually are. She had come to the United States on an H-1B visa in 2017, worked first at a logistics company in San Jose, then as a senior coordinator at a tech firm in Seattle. And then in 2021, she had applied on a quiet Thursday evening with a glass of chai going cold beside her keyboard for a position she expected nothing from, executive assistant to Elon Musk, posted through a third-party recruiter with no company name attached. She got a call 2 days later. 3 interviews. See, a background check so thorough it felt like someone had read her diary. And then the job, which turned out to be less a job and more a complete reorganization of what she understood a working day to mean. She was good at it because she was precise. She was precise because she had been taught by a printing press father in a loud city that the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between something that works and something that doesn't. She read almost everything before Musk did. That was the job. Filter, prioritize, route. He trusted her judgment because she had never once given him a reason not to. In December 2024, a courier package arrived addressed to Musk, marked personal. The return address was ProPublica, New York. But the handwriting on the outer label was not a company hand. It was personal, rounded, careful, the handwriting of someone who had pressed down hard on the pen like the words inside were too important to risk a light touch. Priya signed for it as she signed for everything. She was supposed to add it to the weekly stack. Instead, she opened it. Later, she would not be able to explain exactly why. Instinct, she would tell Agent Ferrante in her deposition. The handwriting, the weight of the package, the way it felt in her hands, not heavy with paper, but heavy with something else, the way certain things are heavy before you know what they contain. Inside, a cover letter and a USB drive. The cover letter was handwritten on plain white paper, 3 pages, dated November 28, 2024. It began, "Mr. Musk, I am sending this to you because you are directly harmed by what I am about to show you, And because I believe you are the only person with enough independence, from government, from Wall Street, from the usual systems of pressure and silence, to ensure that this evidence survives long enough to matter. My name is Ruth Caldera. I am an investigative journalist at ProPublica. And I am frightened. I want to say that plainly because I think plainness is the only honest language left for what I have found. Priya read those 3 pages standing at her desk. She did not sit down. She did not make tea. She stood and read it twice, and then a 3rd time, and then she plugged the USB drive into a secure air-gapped laptop she kept in a locked drawer, a device that had never once been connected to the internet, purchased with her own money 18 months earlier for reasons she had not been able to fully articulate at the time and now understood completely. The files on the drive were organized with the precision of someone who had been a journalist for 19 years and knew that the moment something happened to her, someone else would have to be able to pick this up and run with it without losing a step. Folders labeled by date and category, an index, authentication notes on every document, a summary at the front that could be understood by someone with no background in defense procurement in under 10 minutes. Priya read for 2 hours. What she found, laid out in Ruth Caldera's meticulous and frightened hand, was this: 31 fraudulent invoice duplications across a 4-year period. Her drawing from a single defense discretionary fund sub-account, redirecting launch contracts away from SpaceX and toward a company called Axiom Orbital Solutions, controlled through a holding company by a man named Gerard Plinth, who was the brother-in-law of Senator Marshall Tice of Texas. The total diverted, approximately $340 million. The forged documents, DoD authorization memos bearing the signatures of 2 senior procurement officers, both now retired. The authentication, completed by a forensic documents firm in Switzerland that Ruth had paid out of her own savings. Priya sat for a long time after that. The office was quiet. Through the window, the launch pad was golden in the late afternoon light, the tower casting a long shadow across the flat South Texas scrubland. How she made 3 encrypted backup copies of everything on personal accounts she had set up years ago, each protected by a different 2-factor authentication key stored in 3 different physical locations. Then she printed the cover letter, held it in both hands for a moment like she was weighing it, and walked to Musk's office. He read it again, was quiet for 2 full minutes. Then, "How long have you had this?" "4 hours," she said. He nodded slowly, the nod of a man calculating something with many moving parts. "Call my attorneys." "Which ones?" "All of them." Over the next 3 months, in careful and deliberate silence, Musk's legal team authenticated every document. The forensic accounting firm confirmed the forgeries independently, and the full picture assembled itself piece by piece in a sealed conference room in Starbase, while outside, on the pad, Starship was being prepared for its next test flight, and the world was watching the rocket and not the room. When it was done, Musk made a decision that surprised every lawyer in that room. He would not go to the press. He would not post. He would not leak. He would hand it to the FBI, properly and officially, through channels that could not be ignored. He sealed everything in a plain manila envelope. He pressed the wax himself, dark red, an old seal his grandmother had kept in a desk drawer in Pretoria that he had carried for years without knowing why. He handed it to Priya. "We wait," he said. "They come to us." She asked why it had to be that way, and he looked at the launch pad through the window for a moment before he answered. "Because Ruth Caldera trusted me," he said, "and she's dead." Priya carried the envelope back to her desk. She set it down. She pressed both palms flat against it and held them there, smoothing it, the way you might steady something that is in danger of coming apart. She kept it in her locked drawer for 11 days, until the morning the 10 black SUVs came quietly down State Highway 4, and a woman named Diana Ferrante walked into the lobby, and Priya looked at her and felt, for the first time in 3 months, something loosen very slightly in her chest. Not relief? Not yet. Just the beginning of it. That was the thing about relief Colton Voss had learned. It never arrived all at once. It came in pieces, small and cautious, like light under a door. Though you didn't get to feel safe. You got to feel slightly less afraid. And if you were lucky and careful and nothing went wrong in the next hour, you got to feel slightly less afraid again. He had been slightly less afraid approximately 0 times in the last 72 hours. The envelope arrived at the Washington field office at 2:31 p.m. on March 7th, carried off a government jet at Joint Base Andrews by Diana Ferrante, who had held it against her chest for the entire 4-hour flight from Brownsville and had not eaten, had not reclined her seat, had not closed her eyes once. She had sat upright in the small cabin with the sealed evidence bag on her lap like a woman in a hospital waiting room. Not moving, not sleeping, just holding on and waiting for something to change. The room they brought it to had no windows, 3 cameras, a keypad lock that required 2 separate codes entered in sequence. It smelled of recycled air and industrial cleaning fluid, and the particular stillness of a space that had held important things before and knew how to keep quiet about them. 4 people were present. Agent Ferrante, who set the evidence bag on the table and did not sit down. Dr. Miriam Solis, the Bureau's senior forensic document examiner. A compact, silver-haired woman from El Paso, who had been examining questioned documents for 26 years and who entered the room carrying a soft case of tools, the way a surgeon carries instruments, with the calm of someone for whom the extraordinary had long since become routine. Preston Gault, the FBI director's chief of staff, a man so consistently expressionless that Colton had once tried, in a moment of boredom during a briefing, to imagine what Gault's face would do in an emergency, and had concluded it would do exactly what it was doing now. Nothing. And Colton Voss, who had been summoned to this room 20 minutes earlier by a message on his work terminal that said only, "Room 412. Now. Bring nothing." He had not been told why. He stood in the corner with his hands in his pockets, and the feeling of a man who has stepped off a bus several stops past where he meant to get off, and is only now beginning to understand how far he is from anything familiar. Dr. Solis broke the wax seal with a thin ceramic tool. She photographed it from 4 angles before it was fully open, top, both sides, close. She photographed the inside of the envelope before she reached in. She was the kind of person who documented the container before the contents, because she had learned that the container often told you as much as what was inside. She removed the contents, set them on the table in the order they came out. A USB drive, black, standard size, no markings, a printed index, 3 pages, single-spaced, organized by date and category, numbered 1 through 24, and a handwritten note, 1 sheet of plain white paper, 3 sentences, in a hand that moved across the page with the controlled urgency of someone writing against time. The proof is complete. Every document is authenticated. Do not let it be buried again. Dr. Solis photographed the note. She set it down carefully and stepped back. Colton looked at the index from where he stood. He could read it from across the table. His eyes had always been good. Another quiet gift from a father who sorted small print in low light. He read down the numbered list slowly. Past Item 1, Authentication Certificates. Past Item 4, Wire Transfer Records, Cayman Routing. Past Item 9, Senate Armed Services Committee Meeting Minutes, October 2022. He reached item 7 and stopped breathing for a moment. Defense Discretionary Fund, Subaccount 14C, Duplicate Invoice Records, 2021 to 2024. He looked up. Ferrante was already watching him. She had been watching him since he walked in. She had known, before anyone else in the room, exactly why he was here. "You know what this is," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," he said. "How long?" He told her. All of it. The 11:47 p.m. discovery. The granola bar. The 31 duplicate invoices. The name Gerard Plinth. Had traced through 2 shell companies in 40 minutes on a quiet Thursday night. Okafor's warning. The decision not to send it through Hoof. He told it plainly, without editing himself, the way his father had taught him to give an account of something. Start at the beginning. Say what you saw. Don't decorate it. When he finished, the room was quiet. Ferrante looked at Preston Galt. Galt said, "If he had sent it through Hoof, how long before it disappeared?" "By morning," Ferrante said. "Who plays golf with Tice's chief of staff? We confirmed that 2 days ago." Colton felt the floor shift slightly under him. Not literally. The particular internal shift of understanding something you had almost not understood in time. He thought about the elevator, of not looking up from his screen. Some audits finish themselves, Colton. He had been handed a shovel and told to dig in a very specific spot, by a man who was counting on him to dig carefully enough to look thorough, and not carefully enough to find anything. He had found everything. Galt stood. He straightened his jacket with 2 precise tugs. He picked up the secure handset from the table, dialed a single number, and when it was answered, he said only, "It's real. All of it." He listened for 4 seconds. Then he hung up. He looked at Ferrante first, then at Colton. "Nobody in this room goes home tonight. No contact with anyone outside. Family, friends, no exceptions. You are on full protocol until the director releases you personally." A pause. He looked at the index on the table. "There is a second item on that list that changes the shape of this investigation in a significant way. Item 22. Doctor, Ansolis will need to open the secondary encrypted file before we can discuss next steps." Ferrante looked at the index. She found item 22 near the bottom of page 2, listed between item 21, Authentication Correspondence, November 2024, and item 23, Forensic Accounting Summary, Final. Item 22 read, Personal Correspondence, Authentication Pending. Sender, Classified, Recipient, Classified, Content, Classified. She looked up at Galt. "What is item 22? He picked up his phone again. He turned slightly away. "That," he said, "is the part none of us are ready for yet." The USB drive sat on the table between them, small and black and patient, the way things that contain enormous weight are sometimes very small. Colton looked at the 3 sentences on Ruth Caldera's handwritten note. "Do not let it be buried again." He read it once, and he read it again. Outside, Washington, D.C. moved through its afternoon. Traffic on 4th Street, a metro train somewhere underground. The Capitol Dome catching the last of the winter sun 3/4 of a mile away. Gold and indifferent and enormous. Inside the room, nobody moved. Item 22 waited. And in the Hart Senate office building on Constitution Avenue, 3/4 of a mile from the windowless room where it sat, Senator Marshall Tice was finishing his 2nd cup of black coffee and reading the Wall Street Journal, and feeling, as he felt most mornings, like a man who had built something that could not be touched. He had represented Texas in the United States Senate for 18 years. Before that, 6 years in the House. Before that, 12 years in Texas state politics. To starting as a county commissioner in Midland at the age of 31. A young man with good shoes and a firm handshake, and the particular kind of patience that is less a virtue than a strategy. He had learned early that power was not taken. It was waited for. You built your relationships one breakfast, one phone call, one carefully placed favor at a time, and eventually the structure was so dense and so load-bearing that removing you from it would bring down too many other things, and so nobody tried. His office reflected 18 years of careful accumulation. Photographs on every wall, 4 presidents, 2 prime ministers, a NASA administrator, the CEO of Lockheed Martin, a Super Bowl winning quarterback from Dallas who had campaigned for him in 2018. On the credenza behind his desk, out a framed photograph from October 2022. Tice in a hard hat and a blue Axiom Orbital Solutions polo shirt, standing in front of a rocket engine test stand in Huntsville, Alabama, grinning the grin of a man at a ribbon cutting. The photo had lived on the credenza for 2 years. It had been posted on Axiom's Instagram account for 4 months before someone made a quiet phone call and it was taken down. The photograph was still on the credenza. Nobody had told him to take it down. At 8:12 a.m., his chief of staff, Lorna Beck, came in. She was 41 years old and had worked for Tice for 9 years and had learned, over those 9 years, to deliver bad information the way you lower something fragile. Slowly, from close range, watching his face the whole time. She told him 2 things. The first, the quarterly Axiom board report was ready for his review. She would send it through the secure channel as usual. Second, a contact inside the Department of Defense Comptroller's office had called her at 11:30 the previous night. A routine audit of the Defense Discretionary Fund had gone off routine. A data analyst at the FBI's Washington field office had been in the 14C sub-account records since Tuesday night. He had accessed 31 individual invoice records, cross-referenced against vendor registration files, and had spent 4 hours pulling corporate registration documents for a holding company called Vantage Launch Partners, LLC. She delivered this second item without raising her voice, without changing her expression, watching his face from close range. Waiting. Tice set down his coffee cup, and he looked at the Axiom photograph on the credenza. He looked at it for a long time, the way you look at something you have stopped actually seeing, because you have looked at it every day for 2 years, and it has become part of the wall. "Which analyst?" he said. "Colton Voss, data analyst, grade GS-12. Washington field office, 5-year tenure. No political connections on file, no prior flags. What does he look like?" Lorna paused. It was not the question she had expected. "Average," she said. "Nothing stands out." Tice nodded slowly. In his experience, the most dangerous people always looked like nothing stood out. The ones who looked dangerous were almost never the problem. "And the journalist?" he said. Lorna said nothing. She held his gaze steadily and said absolutely nothing. And because in 9 years she had learned that there were questions Tice asked that he already knew the answer to and was simply confirming, the way you press a bruise to know how deep it goes. He looked back at his coffee. "Good," he said quietly. He made 2 phone calls in the next hour. Neither was logged by his office scheduler, because neither went through his office line. The first was from a personal cell phone to a number saved under a name that was not the name of the person who answered. That conversation lasted 9 minutes and contained no explicit instructions. Just the careful, practiced language of men who have communicated around the edges of things for so long they have developed a fluency in what is not said. The second call was to the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. at a collegial 12-minute conversation about nothing in particular, conducted in the easy, unhurried tone of two men who have shared enough history that they can say what needs to be said without saying it. By 10:30 a.m., a formal procedural request was moving through back channels to have Colton Voss's audit flagged as improperly initiated. A technical challenge that, if processed correctly, would remove his findings from the Bureau's active case files without requiring anyone to explain why. Clean, invisible, the kind of move that had worked before, in other rooms, with other files. By 10:47 a.m., that request reached Preston Gault. Gault read it. He did not approve it. He did not deny it. He placed it in a separate folder, noted the timestamp, noted the routing path, which told him exactly whose desk it had originated from, and set it aside with the careful neutrality of a man who has been waiting for a specific chess piece to move and has just watched it move exactly where he expected. He made a note in the margin. 2 words. Clock started. Tice did not know about the note. He did not know about Gault's folder. He stood at his office window after the calls were done, looking out at the Capitol dome in the flat March morning light, massive and golden and permanent-looking, the way things built to last are designed to look. He had survived 18 years, he thought. Survived budget fights and election cycles and 2 impeachment votes that had nothing to do with him but had shaken everyone around him loose. Yet he had survived a divorce and a primary challenge and a lobbying scandal that had touched 3 of his closest colleagues without ever quite reaching him. He would survive a data analyst named Colton Voss. He turned back to his desk. He picked up his coffee. It had gone cold. Colton Voss understood that feeling. Not coffee, though that too, always, every cup he had ever poured in the Washington field office eventually going cold on his desk because he forgot to drink it while he was looking at something that wouldn't let him look away. He meant the feeling itself, the feeling of something that had been warm and certain turning into something still and unreadable in your hands while you weren't paying attention. He had been sitting in the windowless room on the 4th floor for 6 hours when Darius Okafor arrived. The Okafor had driven through the night from Houston. 11 hours straight up I-45 to Dallas, and then east on I-30 and north on 95, stopping once for gas and not at all for food, arriving at the Washington field office at 9:14 p.m. with a paper cup of truck stop coffee, a canvas bag over his shoulder, and the particular focused quiet of a man who has spent the drive making decisions he cannot unmake. He was 38 years old and looked it in the way that only people who have done genuinely difficult things look their age. Not worn out, just fully inhabited, like every year had left something real behind. He had grown up in Houston's 3rd Ward, the son of a civil engineer father from Lagos, and a Houston public school librarian mother who had raised him to believe that the 2 most powerful things a person could carry were a library card and an exit strategy. He had joined the FBI at 26, worked narcotics, then trafficking, then a 7-month undercover operation in 2020 that he did not talk about, and that had left him with a slight hesitation before he laughed, like the laugh had to clear something on the way out. He walked into room 412 and looked at Colton, and then at the whiteboards, and then at the 6 monitors, and the coffee cups, and the remains of a meal from a delivery place 3 blocks away that nobody had fully eaten. "You look terrible," he said. "You drove 11 hours, Colton said. "I look great," Okafor said, and sat down. They worked through the evening, Colton, Okafor, and a forensic accountant named Hana Ito, who had been brought in at 6 p.m., and who spoke very little, but moved through financial records with the speed and precision of someone for whom numbers were a first language, and everything else was translation. They were building the full picture from the USB drive's contents, laying it out across the whiteboards in a timeline that started in 2019 with the founding of Axiom Orbital Solutions and ended, for now, in the present room, in the present hour, with 31 fraudulent invoices and $340 million, and a dead journalist, and a sealed item on an index that nobody had opened yet. At 11:52 p.m., the room was very quiet. Hannah had her head down over a printout. Colton was staring at a monitor. Okafor was standing at the whiteboard with a marker uncapped, looking at the timeline, when his personal phone vibrated on the table. Not his work phone, his personal phone, the number known only to his wife Adaisy, his mother, his 3 closest friends outside the bureau, and one other person, a category he had not thought about in 4 years. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. A text message. One word. Basement. He did not move for a long moment. He stared at the word the way you stare at something you recognize from a place you thought was closed off. A face from a chapter of your life that ended badly and that you had carefully, deliberately filed away. Colton noticed the stillness. What? Okafor picked up the phone and held it so Colton could see the screen without crossing the room. Colton read it, looked up. What does that mean? Okafor set the phone down. He recapped the marker. He sat in the chair across from Colton and put both hands flat on the table in the way that people do when they are about to say something they have not said out loud before. 4 years ago, he said, I worked an undercover operation out of the Houston field office. Human trafficking network, domestic, 8 cities, 41 confirmed victims over 3 years. I was embedded for 7 months as a logistics coordinator. There was a woman inside the network who was feeding us information at personal risk I cannot adequately describe to you. We communicated through a system she designed herself. One word. Always the name of a place where something would be waiting for us. Garage, rooftop, storage, basement. He looked at the phone. Her name was Celestine Adaora, and she was 29 years old. Nigerian, came to the U.S. on a student visa in 2016, got trapped in the network within 6 months of arriving. She helped us dismantle it from the inside over 7 months and testified in closed session before a federal grand jury in 2021. He stopped. Colton waited. She died in a car accident in Galveston in October 2021, Okafor said. 2 weeks after the final sentencing hearing, single vehicle, rain-slicked road, I went to her funeral. I stood at her grave. I believed it. The room was perfectly quiet. Hana Ito had looked up from her printout. She was watching Okafor with the still attention of someone who has just understood that the conversation has changed entirely. The one-word system, Colton said carefully. Who else knew it? Inside the operation, me, 2 other field agents, he and 1 handler out of the Houston office who retired to Phoenix in 2022. Okafor looked at the phone again. Nobody outside. Celestine designed it herself and told it only to the people she dealt with directly. It was hers. So, whoever sent this either knew her, was her, or got the information from someone who worked that operation. He picked up the phone. And the only ones who worked that operation are the 4 people I named. Colton looked at the whiteboard, at the timeline, at the name Marshall Tice in red marker near the top, and the name Gerald Hoof in blue near the bottom. Added 2 hours ago when they traced his connection to Vantage Launch Partners. At item 22 on the printed index, still in its locked evidence drawer, still waiting for clearance that had not come. Item 22, Colton said. Okafor looked at him, I think, Colton said slowly, whatever is in item 22 is connected to whoever just sent you that message. I think Ruth Caldera knew something beyond the money, beyond Tice and Axiom, something that involved people inside this building. Okafor was quiet for a moment. Then he stood, walked to the evidence drawer, and entered his access code. Galt said, "Wait for clearance," Colton said. Galt said, "Wait for clearance." Okafor agreed. He looked at the phone one more time, at the single word glowing on the screen. I think we just got it. He reached for the drawer, and every light in the building went out. Not a flicker, not a gradual dimming. One moment, the room was lit and humming and full of the small sounds of working people, keyboards, cooling fans, and the faint scratch of Hana Ito's pen on a printout. And the next moment, it was completely, absolutely dark. The kind of dark that has weight. The kind that presses against your eyes and makes you uncertain, for one disorienting second, whether you are still in the same room you were in a moment ago. Nobody spoke for 3 full seconds. Then Colton moved. He did not think about it. His body made the decision before his mind caught up. 3 fast steps across the room to the evidence drawer, hand closing around the handle in the dark, pulling it open. The electromagnetic lock had disengaged the instant the power died. A soft mechanical click he had heard and registered without understanding in the first half-second of darkness. And his body had understood what his mind was still processing. That the drawer was open, that the USB drive and the index and Ruth Caldera's 3-sentence note were sitting in an unlocked drawer in a room with a keypad door that also ran on power. His fingers found the sealed evidence bag. He closed his hand around it and did not let go. Behind him he heard Okafor moving, quiet, deliberate, the careful footsteps of someone trained to navigate darkness without announcing himself. A soft sound, the unsnapping of a holster. Then stillness. "Hana," Okafor said, very low. "Here," she said. Her voice was steady. Colton would think about that later. How steady her voice was in the first seconds of the dark. "Stay where you are. Don't move toward the door." "I'm not moving anywhere," she said. The building's emergency lighting was supposed to engage in 20 seconds. Everyone in the Washington field office knew this because it was in the orientation manual and tested quarterly. Strips of red-tinted lights along the base of the hallway walls, enough to navigate by, enough to see the shape of things without seeing their details. They did not engage. 40 seconds. 60. The dark held completely. The backup generators were supposed to kick in at 20 seconds. The Washington field office at 601 4th Street Northwest was on a separate power grid from the surrounding blocks, a deliberate infrastructure decision made after the 2003 Northeast blackout, when the FBI realized that a bureau building running on the same grid as a Subway sandwich shop was a security liability. The generators had been tested 6 weeks earlier. They had passed. They did not engage. The Colton stood in the dark with the evidence bag against his chest and thought about the specific sequence of failures required to produce this moment. The main power, the emergency lighting, the backup generators, all 3 simultaneously in a building designed to survive exactly this, and understood that this was not a power outage, the way weather is a power outage or age is a power outage. This was a message. Okafor was at the door now. Colton could hear him, the faint sound of a hand moving across a surface, finding the frame, the handle, testing it. The keypad lock had disengaged with the power. The door opened. The hallway was as dark as the room. "Someone knew we were here," Colton said. He hadn't meant to say it out loud. It came out quietly, more to himself than to the room. "You someone always knew we were here," Okafor said from the doorway. "The question is, who told them what we found?" 14 minutes after the power died, they heard footsteps in the stairwell. Fast, multiple sets, the sound of a rapid response team that knew the building's layout and was moving through it without lights, which meant they had equipment that didn't need lights. 4 agents from the external security detail that Preston Galt had stationed in a vehicle outside since the morning, a precaution Colton had known nothing about, swept the floor in under 3 minutes. The power came back at 12:19 a.m. The room was intact. The locks re-engaged with a solid double click. The monitors rebooted one by one, their startup screens casting blue light across the whiteboards, across Hannah's printouts, across Colton's face, which Okafor looked at when the lights came on, and which had the particular expression of someone who has just spent 14 minutes in the dark, understanding something they cannot un-understand. Everything was where it should be, except for one thing. On the floor near the base of the door, half an inch from the metal threshold, was a small white envelope, business card size. It had not been there before the lights went out. It had been slid under the door in the dark by someone who knew which floor, which room, which door. Someone who had been in the hallway, while Okafor was standing on the other side of it, with his weapon drawn, separated by 1 inch of steel and 14 minutes of darkness. Okafor crouched. He did not touch it. He looked at it for a long moment, then looked up at Colton. Colton pulled a single latex glove from the box on the table, crouched beside Okafor, and opened the envelope carefully. Inside, a handwritten note. 4 words, block capitals, written in black ink on plain white cardstock, with the careful, deliberate pressure of someone who wanted to be sure it was legible in poor light. Check the Axiom board. They ran the Axiom Orbital Solutions Board of Directors immediately. A list that had been publicly available in SEC filings for 3 years, that had been looked at by financial journalists and congressional aides, and at least 2 other federal agencies, without anyone pulling the thread all the way to its end. Colton pulled it. He cross-referenced every name against FBI personnel files, retired and active, going back to 2005. The 3rd name on the board, listed as an independent director since March 2022 under a corporate holding company called Crestline Advisory Group, LLC, traced back through 2 shell company registrations, Delaware, then Cayman, to a single individual. No social media. No public profile. 1 employer on record. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Retired. 2021. After 24 years of service. Gerald Hoof, Colton's supervisor. The man who had handed him the audit on a Tuesday morning without looking up from his screen. The man who had said some audits finish themselves. The man Okafor had warned him at 3:19 in the morning 4 days ago not to send his findings to. Colton sat back in his chair. He looked at his hands. They were shaking, not violently, just a fine tremor. To the kind that comes not from fear, but from the physical effort of holding something very still for a very long time, and then being allowed to stop. "He gave me the audit," Colton said. "I know," Okafor said. "He gave it to me because he thought I wouldn't find it." "I know," Okafor said again, quietly. "He's been on that board since 2022. The whole time. Every time I flagged something unusual in a discretionary fund report and put it on his desk. Every single time for 3 years." He stopped. He couldn't finish the sentence because the end of it was too large for the room. Okafor put a hand on his shoulder. Firm. Brief. The kind of contact that doesn't ask anything, just confirms that someone else is there. "Go home," Okafor said. Sleep. 4 hours. I'd come back. I'm not leaving The evidence is locked and guarded, and Galt's people are outside that door right now. Go home. 4 hours. A pause. Your hands are shaking, Colton. Colton looked at his hands. He went home. He did not sleep. Ruth Caldera's handwriting was small and left-leaning, the kind of script that looked hurried even when it wasn't. She had kept notebooks since she was 23 years old. Plain composition books, black and white marbled covers, bought in bulk from a drugstore because she didn't trust anything fancier. She had 41 of them in a cardboard box under her bed, going back to her first year at the Austin American-Statesman, when she covered a city council zoning dispute that turned out to involve the mayor's brother-in-law and a septic tank company. That had been her first real story, and she had written every detail down by hand first, before she typed a single word, because she believed that the act of handwriting slowed you down just enough to notice the things you were about to miss. The notebook Detective Esperanza Lund found was number 42. It was hidden behind a loose baseboard panel in Ruth's bedroom closet. Not hidden cleverly, not hidden like a spy would hide something, but hidden the way a careful person hides something when they are running out of time and working with what they have. The panel had been pried loose with what was probably a butter knife, the wood slightly gouged. The notebook was wrapped in a plastic grocery bag. Practical. Ruth Caldera, to the end. It took the notebook 3 months to reach the right people. When Lund had logged it as personal property, which it was, and it had been released to Ruth's sister, Angela, in San Antonio, along with a cardboard box of other belongings, a ceramic mug, a framed photo of Sophia, 3 paperback novels with cracked spines, a half-empty bottle of ibuprofen. Angela had put the box in her spare room and had not been able to open it for 6 weeks because grief has its own schedule and nobody else gets to set it. When she finally did open it, in late February, she had pulled out the notebook and read the first 2 pages, Ruth's notes from a city budget meeting in November, dry and procedural, and set it aside. She had picked it up again the following week, on a Sunday afternoon when Sophia was at soccer practice, and the house was very quiet, and she had read the rest. She called ProPublica at 7 a.m. on March 9th, 2025. Simon Weathers answered on the second ring. He had been answering his phone on the second ring since the morning Ruth's voice memo came through, which was to say he had not really slept in 5 days. "There's a notebook," Angela said. "I think you need to read it." The entries arrived at the FBI Washington field office digitally, photographed page by Lund herself, in Ruth's apartment on the morning of March 9th, transmitted via secure file transfer at the direction of the same bureau contact who had called her about the basement unit. Ferrante read them first, then she walked them to Colton. He read them in the order they were written. Entry. December 3rd, 2024. Sent the package to Musk today. FedEx in person at the main Austin FedEx on Lamar. Paid cash. I know how this sounds. I know how paranoid this looks. But I sent copies to 3 places. The FBI, officially, which means it will probably be buried, ProPublica's legal team, which means it will move slowly, and to Musk, which is the wild card. I trust wild cards right now more than I trust systems. 3 copies, 3 chances. I keep telling myself that at least one of them will land. Sophia made pasta for dinner tonight. The kind from the box, the one with the cartoon character on it, and she was so proud of herself for timing the noodles correctly that she called me into the kitchen to watch her drain them. I stood there and watched her drain pasta into a colander, and I thought, this is the whole world. This is everything. Whatever happens with the story. This is everything. Entry, December 11th, 2024. Someone followed me from the grocery store to my apartment. I'm not certain. Maybe I'm not. But I took 3 different routes, and they took the same 3 routes. I'm probably imagining it. Sophia asked me today why I keep checking the door. I told her I heard a funny noise outside. She said, "Mom, you're being weird." She's right, I'm being weird, but I'm also not imagining it. I've started keeping my laptop in my bag instead of on my desk. I've started closing the blinds at night. I've started doing the small, ordinary things that look like nothing to anyone watching and feel from the inside, like trying to hold a door shut against something you can't quite see. The story is real. I know it's real. I've verified the invoices. I've verified the memos. I've had 2 separate forensic accountants look at the wire transfer records. The money went where I say it went. The forgeries are real. The name at the center of it, Tice, is real. The only thing I still need is a second human source. One person who was inside the room. Without that, Simon won't run it. And Simon is right not to run it. And I understand that. But the longer I wait, the more I feel like the walls are getting closer. Entry. January 4th, 2025. The ProPublica lawyers want more corroboration before we publish. Simon says we need a second source on the DoD authentication. They're right. I know they're right. I also know that the longer this sits, the more chances there are for it to disappear. Someone called my phone twice from a blocked number. Didn't leave a message. I downloaded an app that records calls automatically now. I feel silly doing it. I also feel like I should have done it 2 months ago. I keep thinking about a woman named Vera Ostrova, who sent me her letter in November, and who I have not been able to reach since. She described things in that letter, the supply chain flags, the component sourcing, the NATO signals data, that I don't have the clearance or the background to fully verify on my own. I need to find her again. If she is willing to be a source, even anonymously, even in a limited way, the story becomes something different. Not just financial fraud, something much bigger. I need to find Vera. Entry. February 19th, 2025. I set up the voice memo system today. If I miss a check-in, Simon gets it automatically. I feel foolish doing it. I also feel like I should have done it 3 months ago. I put a copy of the most important documents, the forgery authentication, the wire transfer records, the Cayman account routing, in a waterproof box. When the box is in the basement storage unit of my building, Unit B7. The key is taped to the inside back cover of this notebook. I have been a journalist for 19 years. I have written stories that put people in prison, and stories that got people released from prison, and stories that changed laws, and stories that changed nothing at all and were read by 14 people and forgotten. I have never been afraid of a story before. I have been nervous. I have been cautious. I have been careful, but not afraid. Not like this. There is a version of this where I am being irrational, where the person behind me at the grocery store was just a person at the grocery store, where the blocked calls were a wrong number, where I am a tired, overworked journalist who has been alone with a very large story for too long and has started to see shapes in shadows. I hope that's the version I'm living in, but I taped the key in the notebook anyway, just in case. Entry, March 3rd, 2025. The final entry. I am going to meet someone tonight who says they can give me the second source confirmation I need. I've verified as much as I can. The meeting is at the bridge at 4:30 a.m. I know how this sounds. But this person claims to be a DoD procurement officer who signed off on 3 of the forged memos under duress. If that's true, it ends the story immediately, in court, not just in print. I've cross-checked what they've told me so far against my existing records. It lines up. It not perfectly. Nothing lines up perfectly. But close enough that I believe they are who they say they are. Close enough that I am going. I've told Sophia I love her. I told her this morning, for no reason, in the kitchen, while she was eating cereal. She looked up at me and said, "I know, Mom. You're being weird again." Good. Let her remember the weird. I want her to remember every ordinary morning. The cereal and the juice and the morning light coming through the kitchen window, and her mother being weird. I leave this notebook to whoever needs it. I leave the key where I've put it. I leave the box to do what boxes of evidence are meant to do. And I leave Sophia everything else. Everything I haven't figured out how to say out loud. Everything that was always the whole world. The notebook ended there, mid-page, and the rest of the paper was blank. In Austin, on the morning of March 9th, Detective Esperanza Lund drove to Ruth Caldera's building with 2 FBI agents on the line via speakerphone. She had been working this case since the morning she walked the Congress Avenue Bridge in the cold, and stood at the railing and looked down at the dark water of the Colorado River 65 feet below, and felt, with the particular quiet certainty of a detective who has stood at too many of these railings, that something was deeply wrong with what she was being asked to call an accident. The building super opened the basement storage level without being asked twice. Unit B7. A standard unit. Concrete walls, wire shelving, the smell of old cardboard and dust. On the lowest shelf, and behind a flat-tire bicycle and 2 boxes of Sophia's old picture books, labeled in Ruth's handwriting, Sophia, ages 3 to 6, keep, there was a gray waterproof box with a combination lock. The key from the notebook opened it. Inside, the forgery authentication documents, exactly as described. The wire transfer records, the Cayman account routing, printed and annotated in Ruth's small, left-leaning hand, with arrows and margin notes. Everything she had promised, in the voice memo she had recorded for Simon Weathers, was there. And one additional item. A single sheet of paper, not annotated, not marked, with a typed list of 18 names under a header that read, Driscoll Hotel, Austin, Texas, private dinner, October 14th, 2022. Lund photographed every page of it. She put the box in an evidence bag. She stood in the basement storage room of a dead woman's building and breathed the cold, still air for a moment, alone, before she walked back to the elevator. The list reached Colton Voss's hands at 4:18 p.m. on March 9th. He read down the 18 names. He recognized 4 of them. He stopped at name 17, Gerald Hoof. He kept reading. He reached name 18, the last name on the list, and stopped. He read it twice. Then he set the paper down very carefully, on the table in front of him, as though it might break. He looked across the room at Ferrante. She was already watching him. In Ruth Caldera's handwriting, in the margin beside the last name, was a single question mark. She had circled the name and put a question mark beside it. Not because she doubted it was real, but because she hadn't yet been able to believe what it meant. Colton understood exactly how she had felt. The question mark sat there in the fluorescent light of the secure room like a door that had just opened onto something vast and dark and cold, and on the other side of which the investigation was no longer the investigation it had been when the day began. Outside, in San Antonio, Sophia Caldera went to soccer practice. Her mother's friend from the team, a woman named Carla, who had known Ruth since Sophia was 4 years old, picked her up and drove her to the field and sat on the cold metal bleachers and watched her run. Sophia scored a goal in the 3rd minute. She looked toward the bleachers, the way children always look toward the bleachers. That involuntary turning, the checking. Carla waved. Sophia turned back to the field and kept running. The war room had been alive for 36 hours straight. 6 monitors, 2 whiteboards so covered in timeline notes and connecting arrows that there was no white left on them. Just a dense, layered map of money and names and dates and lies, built up the way sediment builds at the bottom of a river, each new discovery pressing down on the ones beneath it. Coffee cups on every flat surface. A half-eaten box of donuts that nobody remembered ordering. The low, focused hum of people who had stopped talking about anything except the work. Colton Voss had not slept in 40 hours. He knew this the way you know a fact you have memorized, intellectually, without feeling it. His body had stopped sending the usual signals. No yawning, no heaviness behind the eyes. Just a strange, wire-tight alertness that he recognized from the one time in his life he had run a marathon, as the feeling that comes just before the wall. The feeling that says, you are fine right now, and you will not be fine very soon, and there is nothing you can do about the timing. He was staring at the Driskill Hotel list when Ferrante appeared in the doorway. She didn't knock. She looked at him across the room, at his face, at the paper in front of him, at his hands, which were very still on the table. And she said, quietly, "Come with me." Not the war room, a different office, down the hall. Small. 1 window. The last of the day's light coming through it, orange and long, the kind of late afternoon light that makes ordinary rooms look briefly important, like everything in them is being considered for the last time. 2 chairs, a small table, a folder. Item 22. Ferrante sat across from him and opened the folder without ceremony. He had been waiting to see item 22 since the moment Preston Galt had named it in the processing room 2 days ago, and then deliberately, carefully, said nothing more about it. It had sat in the back of Colton's mind through everything, through the power outage, through the white envelope on the floor, through Gerald Ho's name appearing on an axiom board of directors list, like a stone dropped into still water. Item 22 had been the thing behind all the other things. The locked room at the end of the hallway. Now Ferrante slid it across the table. It was a letter, handwritten, 4 pages, front and back, out in a precise and slightly formal script that Colton would later learn was the result of a European education system that still taught penmanship as a discipline. The paper was cream-colored, heavy, the kind bought at a stationery shop, not a drugstore. The ink was dark blue. The date at the top was October 17, 2024. The salutation read, "Dear Ms. Caldera." The letter was from Vera Ostrova. Colton had first encountered her name in Ruth's notebook. The January 4th entry, where Ruth had written about a woman she was trying to find again. A woman whose letter had described things Ruth didn't have the clearance to fully verify on her own. He had pulled what he could on Vera Ostrova in the hours after reading the notebook. It wasn't much. No social media. No public records beyond a 10-year-old conference program listing her as a signals intelligence specialist presenting at a NATO technical symposium in Brussels. Her name appeared once in a footnote of a declassified 2019 European Parliament report on defense supply chain vulnerabilities, listed as a contributor. After 2020, nothing. She disappeared from every searchable record, the way people disappear when they choose to, or when someone chooses for them. She was not dead. Colton had confirmed that much through Ferrante, who had confirmed it through channels he was not given access to. Vera Ostrova was alive, living somewhere that would not be named in any document he was permitted to read. She had spent the last 4 years watching something from a distance, building a picture piece by careful piece. And when the picture was complete enough to matter, when she had the supply chain data, the NATO signals intelligence, the component sourcing records, the third country flag, she had written a letter to the only journalist she had been able to identify who was already working the same story from a different angle. She had mailed it to Ruth Caldera's ProPublica address in October 2024. It had arrived. Ruth had read it. Ruth had understood immediately that her story, what she had believed was a story about financial fraud, about a senator and a shell company and $340 million in stolen contracts, was also something else. Something underneath the financial fraud, something older and quieter and far more dangerous. Colton read the letter slowly. He read it the way Ruth had taught him to read things without ever meeting him, the way her notebook had modeled it, that deliberate slowing down attention that catches what speed misses. Vera Ostrova wrote with the precision of someone trained to construct arguments that could survive hostile scrutiny. She did not editorialize. She did not express emotion. She stated facts in sequence, cited her sources in parenthetical notations, and let the structure of what she was describing carry all the weight. The structure was this: Axiom Orbital Solutions was not merely a vehicle for contract fraud. It was, in Vera's assessment, supported by 3 years of signals intelligence gathered through a NATO partner program she had worked before her retirement. A procurement cutout. A company designed to absorb defense satellite launch contracts. It'd redirect the technical work through a chain of subcontractors and, in doing so, introduce components manufactured by suppliers in a country that the DoD's own 2023 Supply Chain Risk Assessment had identified as a potential vector for embedded systems interference. Not definitively, not provably in a criminal court. Not yet. But the pattern was there. In the supply chain data, in the component sourcing records, in the way Axiom's technical subcontracting agreements had been structured to obscure the origin of certain navigation and encryption modules used in the payloads of 3 government communications satellites launched between 2022 and 2024. 3 satellites, currently operational, currently in orbit. Vera wrote, "I want to be precise about what I am and am not claiming. I am not claiming these satellites have been compromised. I am claiming that the procurement process by which their components were sourced was structured in a way that made independent verification impossible, and that this structuring appears to have been deliberate, and that the people who designed that structure knew what they were doing and why." She wrote, "The financial fraud is the door. What is behind the door is what concerns me." She wrote, "I am sending this to you because you are already inside the building. I am asking you to look at the room no one has opened yet." Colton set the letter down. The orange light in the window had deepened while he was reading. The room was quieter than the war room. He could hear the building, the low mechanical hum of it, the distant sound of a phone ringing somewhere down the hall, or the particular silence of a place where serious work is being done behind closed doors. He looked at Ferrante. She had been watching him read. She did this, he had noticed. She watched people read important things the way a teacher watches a student take a test, not to catch them cheating, but to understand what the material was doing to them, what it cost them, what it changed. "The 3 satellites," he said. "Yes." "They're operational?" "Yes." "Does the DoD know about this?" "The DoD has known about the supply chain flags since the 2023 risk report," Ferrante said carefully. "Whether they connected those flags to Axiom, and whether anyone with the authority to act on that connection was in a position to do so without running into," she paused, "the wrong people. That is a question currently being worked at a level above this office." Colton absorbed this. This is why the director's office handled the envelope personally. Yes. Because if Who had seen it, it wouldn't have been buried, Ferrante said. Buried implies it could eventually be found again. It would have been destroyed, and the people who built the case would have been destroyed with it. She paused. Like Ruth. The word landed in the room and stayed there. Colton looked at the window. The light was almost gone now, the orange thinning to a pale gray at the edges, the city outside settling into its evening shape, the slow accumulation of lit windows, the distant sound of traffic. Washington, D.C. going about its enormous, mostly hidden life. Was it ruled an accident? He asked. Her death? Ferrante looked at him for a long moment. The Texas Rangers reopened it as of this morning, she said. Detective Lund has been working it since day one. She never believed the fall. Colton nodded slowly. He had not believed it either. From the moment Okafor had said Ruth Caldera's name in that late-night phone call 5 days ago, he had not believed it the way you don't believe something that doesn't fit. Not because you have proof yet, but because the shape of it is wrong, and the shape of things matters. The person she was meeting at the bridge, he said, the DOD procurement officer who contacted her. We're working it. Was there ever a real procurement officer? Or was the meeting itself? We're working it, Ferrante said again, and something in her voice told him that they already knew the answer, and that the answer was the thing she was being careful about, the weight she was managing, the information she was releasing to him in the order she had decided he could handle it. He accepted this. He had learned in 5 days to accept the rhythm of what Ferrante gave him and when she gave it. She was not withholding things to protect herself or the Bureau. She was withholding things the way a surgeon controls what a patient sees of a wound, not to deceive, but because there is an order to things, and the order matters. He looked back at the table, at item 22, at Vera Ostrova's precise blue handwriting, 4 pages of it, to the careful architecture of a warning that had traveled from somewhere unnamed across an ocean and through a dead woman's hands and a wax-sealed envelope and a government jet and a power outage and a white envelope slid under a door in the dark, and had arrived here, in this quiet room, in front of a data analyst from Wichita who had almost sent the wrong email at 1:30 in the morning. Who is the last name on the Driskill hotel list? He asked. Ferrante was quiet for one long beat. The kind of beat that is not hesitation, but preparation. The breath before the thing that changes the shape of the conversation. That, she said, is something I am not authorized to tell you yet. But you know. Yes. And when they find out we know. They already know, she said. That's why the lights went out last night. Colton sat with this, and he thought about Gerald Hoof sitting in his car in the parking garage at 6 a.m. that morning after being placed on administrative leave. He had watched it on the security feed, an old man in a dark car, not moving, hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. He had sat there for 23 minutes. Then he had started the engine and driven away. Slowly, the way people drive when they are not sure where they are going. Colton had felt something watching that footage that surprised him. Not satisfaction. Not the clean resolution of a wrongdoing confirmed and a wrongdoer caught. Something older and sadder than that. The feeling of watching a person at the end of a road they had been walking for a very long time, finally running out of road. He had thought about his father, a postal worker in Wichita who had driven the same route for 26 years and known every house on it by heart, who had never once been asked to do something he wasn't willing to do, who had taken Colton to a Royals game every summer and eaten bad ballpark nachos without complaining and said, on the drive home through the flat Kansas dark, things like, The thing about work is you have to be able to look at it when it's done. Not wise, not philosophical, just true in the way that simple things are true. Gerald Hoof had not been able to look at his work. Colton could look at his. He looked at Ferrante. "What happens now?" "Now," she said, "you go home. You sleep. You come back tomorrow." She folded her hands on the table. "There are people working the parts of this that require different clearances than you have. That will continue. Or what you did, what you found at 1:30 in the morning in an empty office, that is what made all of this possible. The thread you pulled. Without that thread, this envelope arrives through official channels and disappears inside a week." "Ruth found it first," Colton said. "Ruth found it first," Ferrante agreed, "and she made sure it survived her. Those are two different kinds of courage, and she had both of them." Colton looked at the window one more time. The last of the light was gone. Just the reflection of the room now, the two of them, the table, the folder, item 22 lying open between them like a door that could not be closed again. He thought about a 9-year-old girl in San Antonio who went to soccer practice on Saturdays because her mother's friend made sure she got there, who scored a goal and looked toward the bleachers the way children always look toward the bleachers. That involuntary turning, the checking, the need to share the moment with someone who loves you. He thought about a wax-sealed envelope and 4 words spoken quietly in a conference room in Texas by a man who looked tired in the way of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time. "She told me to." He stood up. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. "One question," he said. "Just one." Ferrante looked up at him. "The name on the list," he said. "The last one. Is it someone currently in office?" Ferrante held his gaze for a long moment. Her face was the face she wore in the war room, controlled, giving nothing away. The 22-year veteran face. And then something shifted in it. Not much. It's just enough. "Go home, Colton," she said. "Sleep." He went home. He did not sleep. Spring comes to Washington, D.C., the way it always does. Not all at once, but in small surrenders. A single cherry blossom tree along the tidal basin going pink before the others. A morning that is cold, and then, by noon, is not. The particular quality of light in mid-March that is different from February, light in a way that is difficult to name but impossible to miss. Warmer, longer, carrying in it the faint suggestion that the dark is beginning, finally, to lose the argument. Colton Voss noticed none of this on the morning of March 14th. He was already at his desk at 6:45 a.m., which was not unusual anymore. The past 7 days had restructured his sense of time in ways he suspected were permanent. He no longer measured the day in hours. He measured it in what had happened and what had not happened yet. And the distance between those two things had been shrinking steadily since the morning 10 black SUVs drove into a SpaceX facility in Boca Chica, Texas, and a tired billionaire handed a federal agent a wax-sealed envelope. The 7 days had moved fast, and then slow, and then fast again. The way the current of a river changes depending on what the riverbed is doing underneath. Senator Marshall Tice had resigned his Senate seat on March 12th at 10:14 a.m. Colton had been in the war room when the alert came through. A junior agent had pulled it up on one of the monitors. A wire service notification. 17 words. Senator Marshall Tice of Texas announces resignation, citing health concerns, effective immediately. 11 lines in the official statement, I'd released through his office. No press conference, no appearance. Just the statement. The 11 lines. The words health concerns doing the work that so many political statements ask so few words to do. The war room had gone quiet when the alert appeared on screen. Not celebratory. Not satisfied. just quiet. The particular quiet of people who know that a resignation is not an ending, that the filing of charges is not a verdict, that the work ahead is longer and harder and less visible than the work that brought you here. Tice resigning his seat was not justice. It was the first stone moved from the top of a pile that was very large and very heavy, and had been assembled, stone by stone, over many years by people who had believed they were untouchable. They had believed this because they had been right for a very long time. And they were not right anymore. Gerald Hoof had been indicted on 2 counts of obstruction of justice on March 13th. Colton had not watched the courthouse footage. He had seen enough of Gerald Hoof in the parking garage security feed, the old man in the dark car, hands on the wheel, staring at the wall. And he did not need to see more. Hoof's lawyer had issued a single statement, 4 sentences, saying nothing. Hoof himself had said nothing publicly. He was 58 years old and looked, in the one photograph that ran with the courthouse coverage, like a man who had aged a decade in a week. His eyes in the photograph had the particular quality of eyes that are no longer performing. Not angry, not defiant, not afraid, just tired. The tiredness of a man who has put down something he has been carrying for years, said and found that putting it down did not feel the way he had imagined it would. Colton had stared at that photograph for a long time. He had thought about the fact that Hoof had sat 3 offices away from him for 5 years, that Hoof had assigned him the routine audit, that Hoof had said to him once, in the kitchen near the coffee machine, gesturing at the stack of contract records Colton was carrying, "You know, some of this stuff, it's better not to pull too hard on it." He had said it lightly, like advice, like something practical he was passing on from experience. Colton had smiled politely and said nothing and gone back to his desk. He thought now about whether Hoof had known, even then, that Colton was the kind of person who would pull on it anyway. Whether the assignment had been a test. So whether Hoof had looked at the quiet man with the mechanical keyboard and the Wichita coffee mug and decided he was safe, invisible enough, manageable enough, the kind of analyst who finds things and files them and goes home and doesn't make noise. He had been wrong about the noise. Priya Nair had given her deposition, 3 hours, 2 federal attorneys, a court reporter, and a glass of water she had not touched. On March 11th, she had been precise and thorough and entirely composed, which was what people who had spent years managing complexity under pressure tended to be in rooms that were designed to be intimidating. The federal attorneys had, by Ferrante's account, been visibly impressed and unwilling to show it. She had flown to Chennai the following morning. Her parents met her at the airport, a photograph she sent to Colton from the gate, attached to a text message that said simply, she was right to trust him. Colton had read the message 3 times. He had understood what she meant. Ruth Caldera had been right to trust Musk with the envelope. Musk had been right to trust the process, to sit in a plain conference room in Texas and hand over what he had been given and say 4 words and ask for a lawyer and wait. The system had failed Ruth Caldera in the specific targeted ways that systems fail when the wrong people are inside them. And it had also, eventually, imperfectly, stubbornly, done what it was built to do, because the right people had been inside it too. Colton Voss pulling a thread at 1:30 in the morning. Darius Okafor answering a call in 4 minutes. An Esperanza Lund walking a bridge and feeling, with the quiet certainty of long experience, that the shape of something was wrong. Ruth Caldera making a copy before she handed over the original, because she had watched powerful men handle inconvenient truths long enough to know that originals disappear. The system did not save Ruth Caldera. The system carried what she left behind until it reached the people who could use it. That was not the same thing. It was not enough. But it was what there was. And the people inside it had done what they could do with it. And Colton had decided, in the long, sleepless nights of the past week, that the difference between those two things, what the system should have done and what it had done, was not a reason to stop believing in systems. It was a reason to stay inside them, and to be the person who answers the call in 4 minutes, to pull the thread and not send it through the wrong channel and not go home until the thing that needs doing is done. At 9 a.m. on March 14th, Colton received the call from Ferrante. "Conference Room B," she said. "J. Edgar Hoover Building. Be there at 11. "The list?" he asked. A pause. "Bring your badge and nothing else." The J. Edgar Hoover Building on Pennsylvania Avenue was a 10-minute walk from the Washington field office. Colton walked it. The morning had the quality of those mid-March mornings, cold still but with the suggestion of something different underneath it, the air carrying a faint sharpness that was not winter anymore, but was not yet anything else. He passed the National Archives, and he passed a food truck and a tour group and a man selling newspapers from a folding table, the papers stacked in crisp piles, the headlines visible from the sidewalk. He did not look at the headlines. He looked straight ahead and walked at a steady pace and thought about a spreadsheet at midnight, and a duplicate invoice number, and 11 minutes of staring at something that should have been impossible, the smallest wrong thing, looked at long enough, becoming the biggest true thing. Conference Room B was on the 4th floor. It was a small room, not the kind of room where important things were announced in front of cameras, not a hearing room or a briefing theater, just a room. Rectangular table, 8 chairs, a water pitcher nobody had poured from yet, to fluorescent light overhead that hummed at a frequency you stopped noticing after the first few minutes. Ferrante was already there when Colton arrived. Beside her, Preston Galt, still stone-faced, still in a jacket that looked like he had slept in it, or possibly had not slept in it because he had not slept. Darius Okafor sat at the far end of the table, his hands folded in front of him, his face carrying the careful neutrality of a man who had already been told what was in the room and had spent the time since deciding how he felt about it. And one other person, a woman Colton did not recognize. 50s, gray-streaked hair cut short, dark suit, no jewelry. She had the bearing of someone who had spent decades in rooms like this one and had stopped being affected by them. She was introduced simply as Deputy Assistant Director Hale. No first name offered, no agency specified beyond that. She nodded at Colton when he sat down. She did not smile. She did not need to. On the table in front of Ferrante, a single manila folder, not sealed, not wax, just a folder, lying flat, with Colton's name written on the tab in black marker. Ferrante slid it across the table to him. He opened it. Inside, the Driskill Hotel list. The original photograph, high resolution, the sheet of paper in Ruth Caldera's evidence box held flat against a clean white surface, every name visible and clear. He had already read 14 of the 18 names. He had already processed what 14 of them meant. The senator's aides, the defense procurement officers, the Axiom board members and shell company directors, and the retired general who had, it turned out, moved from the Pentagon to the board of a defense technology company 18 months after the Driscoll dinner, a timeline that was suggestive in a way that courts tended to find interesting. He had already seen Gerald Hoof's name at position 17. He found the last name now, position 18, Thomas Aldrin Wakefield. He stared at it. He read it twice, which was not because he had misread it the first time, but because the brain, when it receives information that restructures the shape of something large, tends to require the information twice. The first reading lands. The second reading confirms that the first reading was real and not a mistake and cannot be taken back. Thomas Aldrin Wakefield, former Deputy Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Retired 2022, after 24 years of service. He retired with a ceremony in the Grand Hall of this building, these walls, these floors, a framed commendation from the President, a standing ovation from 300 colleagues, a speech that had been described in the Bureau's internal newsletter as a model of public service and institutional dedication. He now sat on the boards of 2 defense technology companies. He gave keynote speeches at security conferences for $45,000 a talk. He lived in Georgetown, in a house with a garden that had been photographed for a magazine profile the previous summer. He was 61 years old and looked, in that photograph, like a man who had earned his comfort and intended to keep it. And 3 weeks before Ruth Caldera's body was found at the base of Congress Avenue Bridge in Austin, Texas, and Thomas Wakefield had eaten dinner with Gerald Ho at a restaurant in Georgetown that had no cameras. A dinner that neither man had mentioned to anyone. A dinner that Vera Ostrova, alive, careful, watching from a distance with a telephoto lens and the particular patience of a person who has learned that the most important moments tend to happen in places where no one is supposed to be watching, had photographed and included in the package she sent to Ruth Caldera, along with everything else. The photograph was in the folder. The last page. 2 men at a table near a window. Wine glasses. A bread basket. The ordinary props of an ordinary dinner between old colleagues who happened, between them, to know exactly how much damage one determined data analyst could do if the wrong audit crossed the wrong desk at the wrong time. And 3 weeks later, Ruth Caldera went to a bridge at 4:30 in the morning to meet a source who had promised her the second confirmation she needed. The source who had contacted her. The source whose story had lined up almost perfectly with her existing records. Almost. Colton set the folder down. He set it down carefully, the way he had set down the Driscoll list the first time, as though the paper itself required a particular kind of handling. He looked up. Ferrante was watching him. Okafor was watching him. Deputy Assistant Director Hale was watching him with the same careful, evaluating attention she had brought into the room with her when she sat down. The fluorescent light hummed overhead. The water pitcher sat untouched. "He's the one who set up the meeting," Colton said. It was not a question. "We believe so," Ferrante said. "You're through channels that couldn't be traced back to him directly." "Through a cutout who has since," Ferrante paused, "made himself difficult to locate. That investigation is active." Colton nodded slowly. "The power outage." "Not directly attributable to Wakefield," Galt said, speaking for the first time. His voice had the same quality it always had. Flat, precise, the voice of a man who chose his words the way engineers choose load-bearing materials. But the outage originated from an access point inside the building's facilities management system. An access point that was authorized by credentials belonging to a contract security vendor whose principal contact, when we ran him back, had a prior professional relationship with Wakefield's office during his tenure as deputy director. Colton absorbed this. He had people still inside. "Had," Galt said, "past tense, as of 72 hours ago." Deputy Assistant Director Hale spoke then, for the first time since the room had started. Her voice was measured and unhurried, the voice of someone who had sat in many rooms like this one and had never once confused urgency with speed. "Mr. Voss," she said, "what I am about to tell you is covered under the non-disclosure provisions you signed when you were briefed into this investigation. What you hear in this room today does not leave this room in any form, spoken, written, or otherwise, without direct authorization from the director's office. Is that understood? Yes, Colton said. Thomas Wakefield is under active federal investigation. A sealed grand jury proceeding was initiated on March 11th. He does not know the full scope of what we have, though he is aware, as Agent Ferrante indicated to you last week, that we know something. The lights going out was his way of testing how much. She paused. It told him more than he intended it to. Because we kept everything, Colton said. Because you kept everything, she said. In the dark, in an unlocked evidence drawer, with your hand on the bag. Something shifted in her face. Not a smile exactly, but the nearest thing to warmth that the face of a career intelligence official tends to permit. That was good work. Colton said nothing. He thought about Okafor in the dark, moving quietly toward the door with his weapon out. He thought about Ferrante, carrying the evidence bag off the government jet against her chest, like something alive. He thought about all the small decisions made correctly in the dark, and by ordinary people who happened, in the specific moments that mattered, to do the right thing. The meeting lasted another 40 minutes. Procedures, protocols, the careful laying out of what came next, the investigation, the sealed proceedings, the coordination with the DoD and the Office of the National Security Advisor on the satellite supply chain question, the separate but related matter of Ruth Caldera's death, which Detective Lund and the Texas Rangers were working with a focus and a fury that Lund had been quietly accumulating since the morning she stood on a bridge and looked down at dark water and decided she did not believe what she was being asked to believe. At the end of the meeting, Galt gathered his papers, nodded once at the room, and left. Deputy Assistant Director Hale shook Colton's hand. A brief, firm handshake, said the kind that means what it is without needing to be anything else, and walked out. Okafor clapped Colton once on the shoulder as he passed. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Ferrante and Colton were the last ones left in the room. She was putting the folder back together, straightening the pages with the same methodical attention she brought to everything. She did not look at him while she did it. The ProPublica piece runs tomorrow, she said. First of 3, Ruth's byline. Simon Weathers made sure of it. The family approved it. Colton thought about Simon Weathers crying when he saw the front page, which was something he had learned secondhand through Ferrante and which he believed completely without having to see it. He thought about a woman who had won a National Press Foundation award in 2021 and coached Saturday morning soccer and bought composition books in bulk and kept 42 of them going back to a city council zoning dispute that turned out to matter more than anyone expected. She would have gotten it published, he said. If they hadn't, he stopped. Yes, Ferrante said. She would have. She did get it published, just not the way she planned. Ferrante looked at him. The work survived. She made sure of that. That's what the 3 copies were for. The FBI, ProPublica, the wild card. She closed the folder. She didn't trust any single system. She trusted the odds that at least one of them would hold. Colton nodded. He picked up his badge from the table. He stood. He looked, one last time, way at the closed folder with his name on the tab. He thought about a granola bar from a vending machine and a spreadsheet at midnight, and a number that appeared twice where it should have appeared once. He thought about 11 minutes of staring at a thing that was wrong. He thought about the decision, made at 3:18 in the morning in a silent office in a building where everyone else had gone home, to send the message to the right person instead of the wrong one. The smallest wrong thing. Looked it long enough, becoming the biggest true thing. He walked out of the J. Edgar Hoover building at 12:17 p.m. and stood on the steps for a moment, blinking in the pale March light. Pennsylvania Avenue ran east and west, the city going about its enormous, complicated, to mostly hidden life. The traffic and the tourists and the lunch crowds and the couriers on bikes and the men and women in dark suits carrying things that mattered to someone, somewhere, more than they let on. The Capitol dome visible to the east, gold at the top, gleaming in the midday light, the way it always gleamed, the way it would keep gleaming long after every name on a hotel dinner list had been accounted for, and every piece of evidence had found its way to the people who needed it. Colton stood on the steps and breathed the cold, not quite spring air. He thought about Sofia Caldera in San Antonio, going to soccer practice on Saturdays because her mother's friend from the team made sure she got there every week. Growing up, knowing what her mother had done. Knowing that her mother had loved her more than everything, and had also believed that some things were worth the cost of doing them. Not instead of love, but because of it. Because the world Sofia was growing up in was made, in small and mostly invisible ways, by the people who had refused to let it be worse than it was. He thought about a wax seal pressed over a manila envelope by a man who had decided, finally, to trust something outside himself. He thought about 4 words spoken quietly in a conference room in Texas. "She told me to." Inside the building, at his desk upstairs, in the office, he would not be reassigned away from for another 3 years, until a promotion took him somewhere with a window and a different view of the same city. There was a legal pad sitting open to a fresh page. He had left it there that morning, before he walked to the Hoover building. A habit. Always leave something to come back to. Always have the next thing ready. He went back inside. He sat down. He picked up a pen. At the top of the fresh page, in his plain, careful handwriting, he wrote one name. Thomas Aldrin Wakefield. He drew a line under it. He began. In San Antonio, Sofia Caldera scored 2 goals at Saturday morning soccer practice. She looked toward the bleachers both times. Carla was there both times, waving. In Chennai, Priya Nair sat on her parents' porch in the evening warmth and did not look at her phone for 3 hours, which was the longest she had managed in 4 years. In an apartment in a city that will not be named, Vera Ostrova read the news on a laptop with a VPN and a cup of tea going cold beside her. And when she found the first ProPublica headline, Ruth Caldera's name above it, Ruth Caldera's photograph beside it, she sat with it for a long time without moving. In Austin, Texas, Detective Esperanza Lund drove across Congress Avenue Bridge on her way home, the way she had driven across it every working day for 11 years. She did not look at the water. She looked at the road ahead. And in the FBI Washington field office, in a cubicle with no photos and no plants, and a coffee mug that said, "Wichita, not as flat as you think." A data analyst who had never fired his weapon in the line of duty and had been promoted once and commended twice, and noticed almost never sat under the fluorescent light and wrote the next name, and the name after that, and did not stop. And that was the end of The Secret in the Envelope. A story about one envelope, one thread pulled at midnight, and one journalist who made sure her work would outlive her. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you listening from right now? Drop your city, your country, wherever you are in the world, down in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it kept you hooked from chapter 1 all the way to that final name on the list, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this one. We have many more coming your way. And if you know someone who loves a good thriller, a friend, a family member, someone who needs something powerful to listen to today. Share this video with them. Because great stories are always better when they are passed on. Just like Ruth Caldera passed on her envelope. Spread the kindness. Spread the awareness. We will see you in the next one.